You're 7 years old. This morning, your mother dressed you. She braided your hair the way she always does. She whispered something you didn't understand, something about being brave. Then, soldiers came to your house and took you away. Your mother didn't scream. She didn't fight. She just stood there, watching you disappear down the road. You will not sleep in your home again until you're 30 years old, if you survive. Welcome to the Agoge, the Spartan machine that turned children into the most feared warriors the ancient world ever produced. The training program behind the 300 at Thermopylae, and one of the most systematic child abuse systems ever designed by a civilization. You've seen the movie. You know the legend.
300 Spartans holding a mountain pass against 1,000,000 Persians, abs glistening, spears flying. Tonight we dine in hell. Great cinema, terrible history. Because the film shows you the battle, it doesn't show you what made those men. It doesn't show you what they did to 7-year-old boys in the name of creating perfect soldiers. It doesn't show you what happened in the barracks at night, what happened during the Krypteia, what happened to the ones who didn't make it. The Spartans didn't write their own history. They were too busy training for war. Almost everything we know comes from outsiders, Greeks from other cities who visited Sparta and came back disturbed by what they saw.
And what they saw was a state that had turned child-rearing into military production. Let's start at birth. According to Plutarch, when a Spartan baby was born, the father didn't get to decide if it lived. He carried the infant to a council of elders, old men who inspected the child like livestock at auction. They checked limbs. They looked for deformities. They made a judgment. If the baby passed, it lived. If not, it was taken to a place called the Apateti, a chasm on Mount Taygetus, and left to die. Now, I need to be honest with you. Modern archaeologists have actually found this pit. They excavated it in 1983. They found bones, dozens of skeletons. Not one of them was an infant. Every skeleton was an adult male, aged 18 to 35.
Criminals, traitors, prisoners of war. The Spartans used the pit, yes, but probably not for babies. This part of the legend might be exaggerated. Propaganda. A story other Greeks told to make Sparta seem even more alien than it already was. But here's the thing. Even if babies weren't thrown into pits, the inspection was real. The principle was real. From the moment you drew breath in Sparta, your value was measured by your usefulness to the state. And at 7 years old, the state came to collect. The Agoge began with separation. Boys were taken from their families and placed into groups called agelai. The word literally means herds, like cattle. They slept together in barracks. They trained together.
They were supervised by older boys, teenagers who had authority to discipline them however they saw fit. The adults in charge were called paidonomos, boy herders. Think about that language for a moment. Herds, herders. These weren't children being educated. They were animals being domesticated. For the first few years, training was relatively mild. Reading, writing, basic athletics. But at 12, everything changed. At 12, a Spartan boy was given one cloak. One for the entire year. No shoes, no bed, no blanket. He slept on reeds he pulled from the riverbank with his bare hands. He was given barely enough food to survive. This wasn't negligence, it was policy. The Spartans believed hunger made better soldiers.
A starving boy learns desperation. A desperate boy learns to steal. Stealing was not just permitted in the Agoge, it was required. Boys were expected to supplement their starvation rations by stealing food from farms, from kitchens, from wherever they could find it. The Spartans believed this taught cunning, stealth, the ability to survive behind enemy lines. But here's the twist. If you got caught stealing, you were beaten severely. Not because stealing was wrong, because getting caught was weak. One famous story, probably legendary, but repeated by multiple ancient sources, tells of a boy who stole a fox and hid it under his cloak.
The technical terms were erastes, the older lover, and eromenos, the younger beloved. The older man was called the inspirer. The boy was called the hearer. Modern historians debate how sexual these relationships were. Xenophon, who actually sent his own sons through the Agoge, insisted Spartan relationships were chaste, unlike the openly physical pederasty practiced in Athens and other Greek cities. But Plutarch, writing later, describes something more intimate. And the fact that Spartan brides were dressed as boys on their wedding night, hair cut short, wearing men's clothing, suggests something about what Spartan men had learned to desire during their years in the barracks.
The truth is probably somewhere in the middle, and probably varied from case to case. But what's undeniable is this. 12-year-old boys were paired with adult male warriors who had complete authority over them in a system where beatings were routine, where weakness was punished with violence, where boys had no family to protect them. Draw your own conclusions. The violence in the Agoge wasn't incidental. It was the curriculum. Instructors encouraged fights between boys. They staged brawls. They rewarded aggression. Boys who showed fear or hesitation were mocked publicly, sometimes by Spartan girls who would sing humiliating songs about specific boys by name during festivals.
Imagine being 13 years old, already starving, already beaten, and having to stand in public while girls your age sing about what a coward you are. The Spartans believed shame was a tool. They used it constantly. But the ultimate test came later. At around 20 years old, the best recruits were selected for something called the Krypteia. The Krypteia is sometimes translated as secret service or secret police. Here's how it worked. Young Spartan men were sent into the countryside with nothing but a knife. They hid during the day, they moved at night, and they hunted. Their targets? Helots.
The Helots were Sparta's slave population, conquered peoples who worked the farms and did the labor that allowed Spartan citizens to train for war full-time. They outnumbered Spartans roughly 7-1, and the Spartans were terrified of them. Every year, the Spartan government formally declared war on the Helots, not as a military campaign, as legal cover. This declaration meant any Spartan could kill any Helot without being guilty of murder. The Krypteia took advantage of this. Young men stalked the countryside, targeting Helots who seemed too strong, too confident, too capable of leading a rebellion. They killed them in their sleep. They ambushed them on roads. They murdered them in fields. This wasn't war. This was terrorism. And it served two purposes. It kept the Helot population afraid, and it taught young Spartans to kill. Your first kill was a sleeping farmer, an unarmed slave, someone who had never threatened you, and you did it because the state told you to. That's what made a Spartan. Not everyone survived the Agoge. Ancient sources mention boys dying during training, from beatings, from exposure, from the brutal flogging contests at the altar of Artemis Orthia, where boys were whipped until they collapsed, sometimes fatally, while crowds watched and cheered. Those who made it through earned citizenship at 30. They joined a Syssitia, a military mess hall, where they'd eat with their brothers-in-arms for the rest of their lives.
They could finally marry, finally have children, children who would be taken away at 7.
the cycle continued for centuries. So yes, the 300 were real. The Battle of Thermopylae happened. Those men fought with extraordinary discipline and died with extraordinary courage. But they were also products of a system that took children from their mothers, starved them, beat them, possibly abused them, trained them to kill unarmed slaves, and taught them that dying in agony without complaint was the highest virtue. We remember the glory. We forget the machine. And that machine didn't produce heroes. It produced weapons.
Human beings systematically stripped of everything that makes us human: family, compassion, choice, until all that remained was the ability to fight and die on command. The 300 didn't dine in hell. They were raised there.